The sound of the morning alarm was the same old beep that filled the tiny one-room apartment every day. It wasn't much of a home, but it was all Amara could afford. She lived on the edge of Atlanta, in a building that had seen better days. Paint peeled from the walls and the heater rattled like it was complaining about still being alive. But Amara never complained. She was used to making do with what she had. At 19, Amara had already seen more than most people twice her age. She'd been in foster homes since she was a little girl. Her parents had passed away in a car accident when she was 5, and from then on, she bounced from one home to another. Some families were kind, others not so much. But through it all, she learned to depend on herself. She kept her heart kind, even when the world wasn't kind to her. Her mornings were always the same. She'd wake up before sunrise, wash up using the old bathroom sink, pull on her diner uniform, and tie her hair back neatly. Then she'd catch the early bus to the other side of town, where she worked at Sonny's Diner. The pay wasn't much, but it helped her cover rent and school fees at the community college. She was studying nursing because she wanted to help people. Maybe deep down it was her way of filling the emptiness she'd carried since losing her parents. That morning the rain was already falling hard. The streets glistened and the sound of tires on wet pavement echoed as cars rushed past. Amara pulled her old hoodie tighter around her shoulders as she walked to the bus stop. She was tired, but she smiled when she saw Mrs. Johnson, an older woman from her building, standing with an umbrella. "Morning, baby," the woman said kindly. "You're up early again." "Morning, ma'am," Amara replied with a small smile. "Can't be late for work." "You're a hard worker. One day something good's gonna come your way," Mrs. Johnson said with a knowing nod. Amara smiled again, a little shyly. People said that to her often, but she'd learned not to hope for too much. Still, she thanked the woman, got on the bus, and stared out the window as the rain ran down the glass. The city looked blurry, like it was dreaming. By the time she reached the diner, the smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. The place was already half full: truck drivers, office workers, and a few regulars who knew her by name. Amara tied her apron and got to work. She moved quickly and quietly, refilling coffee cups, taking orders, and offering tired smiles. Her boss, Mr. Peters, wasn't exactly friendly, but he trusted her. She never slacked off, never complained, and never showed up late. "Amara, can you take table 6? He called from behind the counter. "Yes, sir," she said, grabbing a menu and heading over. At table 6 sat an older couple who had come in a few times before. They smiled when they saw her. "Morning, sweetheart," the woman said. "You always take good care of us." "Morning," Amara replied warmly. "What can I get for you today?" It was little moments like that that made her day bearable. She liked people, their stories, their smiles, their tiny bits of kindness. Sometimes when she watched them laughing or talking with their families, she imagined what it would have been like to have her own. The hours passed quickly. By evening, her legs ached and her back was sore. She clocked out, stuffed her tips into her pocket, and waved goodbye to her coworkers. The rain had started again, heavier now. Thunder rolled in the distance, and flashes of lightning lit up the gray sky. The buses were running late, so Amara decided to walk home. It wasn't far, about 1.5 miles, but it meant cutting through a quiet back road that curved through a wooded area. It was darker and lonelier than she liked, but she'd walked it dozens of times before. She pulled her hood up and started walking. Her shoes splashed through puddles as she hummed softly to herself. The sound of crickets mixed with the rain, and for a moment, she found peace in the rhythm of it all. Her mind drifted to her future, how she'd save enough money to transfer to a nursing program at a bigger college. She wanted to work in a hospital, maybe even a children's ward. She didn't have much, but she had dreams, and that was something. About halfway home, the road dipped into a small bend surrounded by trees. The rain made it hard to see far ahead. That's when she heard it, a loud screech of tires followed by a sickening crash. The sound made her heart jump. She froze for a second, listening. The rain kept pouring, but underneath it she heard the faint sound of metal twisting, glass breaking, and then silence. Her first thought was fear. What if it was something dangerous? But then another thought came. What if someone was hurt? She started running toward the sound. Her feet slipped in the mud, and the rain stung her face, but she didn't stop. When she reached the bend, she saw it. A car half in the ditch, its headlights still glowing weakly through the rain. Smoke was rising from the hood. "Hello?" she shouted, her voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" No answer. She ran closer, her heart pounding. Through the cracked windshield, she could see an elderly man slumped over the steering wheel. His face was pale, and blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. The airbag had deployed, and the inside of the car smelled like burnt rubber. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Sir, can you hear me?" Still nothing. She tried the driver's door, but it was jammed. She ran around to the passenger side. It opened, but the frame was bent and she had to pull hard to get in. The man was breathing, but barely. She remembered what she'd learned in her first aid class. Check breathing, check pulse, keep the airway clear. Okay, just stay with me," she said, her voice shaking but calm. She reached for her phone with one hand and called 911. Her fingers trembled as she explained what happened, gave them the location, and said she'd stay until help arrived. The operator told her to keep him awake if she could. She leaned closer and spoke softly. "Sir, can you hear me? Help is coming, okay? You're going to be fine." He moved slightly, a faint groan escaping his lips. That was enough to give her hope. But then she smelled something else, gasoline. Her stomach tightened. She turned and saw smoke starting to rise thicker from under the hood. Panic shot through her chest. No, she whispered. "We have to get you out." The man was wearing his seatbelt, but the latch was stuck. She tugged at it with both hands, her fingers slipping from the rain and blood. "Come on," she cried out, pulling harder until finally it snapped loose. "Sir, we have to move," she said, wrapping her arms under his shoulders. He was heavy. Too heavy for her small frame, but adrenaline gave her strength. Inch by inch, she pulled him toward the open door, her shoes sliding in the mud. The smoke turned into tiny flames now, licking the edge of the hood. Her chest burned, but she didn't stop. She dragged him out, one step at a time, until they were far enough from the car. They collapsed together on the wet grass. Amara coughed hard, trying to catch her breath. The man lay still beside her, breathing shallowly. She held his hand tightly and spoke softly, almost like a prayer. "You're gonna make it, sir. Just hold on. Please hold on." In the distance, she heard sirens. Red and blue lights began to flash through the rain. Relief washed over her so fast it made her dizzy. When the firefighters and paramedics arrived, she quickly told them what happened. They moved in, lifting the man onto a stretcher. One of the firefighters looked at her wide-eyed. "You pulled him out yourself?" he asked. Amara nodded weakly. He let out a low whistle. "You saved his life." She didn't know what to say. Her hands were shaking, her hair soaked, her uniform stained with mud and blood. She just nodded again. The paramedics loaded the man into the ambulance. One of them tried to get her to come along, but Amara shook her head. "No, I'm fine. Just make sure he's okay." As the ambulance drove off, she stood there in the rain, her heart still racing. The car she'd pulled him from was now fully engulfed in flames. The firefighters sprayed it down, but the sight made her knees weak. She sat down on the curb, too tired to cry. After a few minutes, a police officer came over. "Miss, can I get your name and number for the report?" "Oh, She hesitated. She didn't like attention, and she wasn't sure she wanted to be involved in whatever might come next. "It's Amara Johnson," she said finally. "I live nearby." He jotted it down and nodded. "You did a brave thing tonight, Miss Johnson. Most people would have just called and waited." "I couldn't just walk away," she said quietly. He smiled. "Well, the world needs more people like you." When everything was finally over, Amara began walking home again. Her clothes clung to her skin, her hair dripping down her face. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle. The road was quiet now except for the faint hum of the city in the distance. She replayed everything in her mind. The sound of the crash, the man's pale face, the flames, the way his hand felt cold in hers. She didn't know who he was, where he came from, or what would happen to him. But she hoped he would live. When she finally reached her apartment, she changed into dry clothes and sat on the edge of her bed. Her hands still trembled. She looked out the window at the glowing streetlights, feeling both exhausted and strangely at peace. For the first time in a long while, she felt like her life had meaning, like maybe all the pain, all the loneliness had led her to that very moment, to help someone, to save a life. She didn't know it yet, but that one act of kindness was about to change her world forever. The next morning, Amara woke up later than usual. Her body ached all over and her mind was still replaying the events of the night before. For a moment she wondered if it had really happened. The crash, the fire, the man she'd pulled from the wreck. It felt like a dream except for the bruise on her arm and the faint smell of smoke still on her jacket. She turned on the small TV in her room while getting ready for work. The local news was running a story about a car accident on Route 8. The anchor's voice was calm and serious. An elderly man was rescued last night after his car skidded off the road during heavy rain and caught fire. Authorities say the victim is in stable condition thanks to the quick actions of a young woman who pulled him from the vehicle moments before it exploded. Amara froze, her toothbrush halfway to her mouth. On the screen they showed the burnt remains of the car. Then briefly a blurry photo from a distance, a girl in a hoodie standing near the scene. It was hard to tell who it was, but she knew. Her heart started beating faster. The reporter continued. The man has been identified as Richard Langston, a well-known businessman and philanthropist. He was taken to Atlanta General Hospital, where he's recovering. Authorities are looking for the woman who saved him to thank her personally. Amara stared at the TV, speechless. A businessman? A philanthropist? She had no idea the man she'd rescued was anyone important. She felt both nervous and proud at the same time. She never thought what she did would end up on the news. She turned off the TV and sat quietly for a moment. The thought of being on TV or getting attention made her uncomfortable. She didn't do it for recognition. She just wanted to help. She shook her head, trying to push the thought aside, and got ready for work. At the diner, the usual noise greeted her, clinking dishes, sizzling food, and the soft chatter of early customers. But as soon as she walked in, her coworker Lisa looked up from behind the counter and grinned. "Girl, was that you on the news?" she asked, eyes wide with excitement. Amara froze. "What? No, I don't think so." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Come on, don't play with me. That photo looked just like you. Same hoodie, same hair. You saved that old man, didn't you?" Amara blushed and looked away. "I don't know what you're talking about," Lisa laughed. "You're a hero. I knew you were quiet, but I didn't know you were brave like that." Mr. Peters, the manager, overheard and came over. "Is this true?" he asked, crossing his arms. "You were at that crash last night?" Amara sighed softly. "I was walking home. I saw it happen. I just helped." For a moment, Mr. Peters just stared at her. Then he nodded. "Well, I'll be. Not everyone would have done that. You should be proud." "I didn't do it for that," she said quickly. "I just did what I thought was right." Still, for the rest of the day, everyone kept talking about it. A few regular customers even congratulated her when they heard. It made her feel shy and a little embarrassed. She wasn't used to being noticed. When she got home that evening, she sat by her window again. The rain had stopped and the air smelled fresh. She thought about the man, Richard Langston. Was he awake now? Was he okay? She wished she could know. But deep down, she figured someone like him lived in a completely different world. People like that didn't cross paths with people like her again. Across the city, in a quiet hospital room, Richard Langston was opening his eyes for the first time since the accident. His head hurt, his body ached, and everything felt foggy. A nurse smiled when she saw him awake. "Good evening, Mr. Langston," she said softly. "You're in Atlanta General. You've been unconscious for a day, but you're safe now." He blinked slowly, trying to remember. The last thing he saw was the rain, the headlights, the sudden turn, and then a voice, a soft voice calling to him. A girl's voice. He frowned slightly. "There was someone. A young woman. She pulled me out." The nurse nodded. "Yes, sir. The police said a girl saved you before the car caught fire. She left before they could get her information. He looked out the window quietly for a long moment. His whole life, people had been around him. Employees, assistants, business partners. But he couldn't remember the last time someone had helped him just out of kindness. No cameras, no contracts, no reward, just care. He whispered, "Find her, sir? The girl who saved me. Find her." The nurse smiled politely. "I think the police are already trying." Days passed. The story spread online and across local stations. Reporters called her the unknown hero of Atlanta. Some people claimed they knew her, others made up stories. Amara avoided it all. She didn't want fame. She still went to work, went to class, and came home quietly. But deep down she felt something changing inside her, like her life had shifted even if she didn't yet understand how. One Friday evening after her shift, she stayed behind to clean up. The diner had closed early and she was wiping down the tables when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up, surprised. They were already closed. "Sorry, we're not," she started, then stopped. An older man in a gray coat stood in the doorway, supported by a cane. His face looked familiar, though thinner, and his eyes were kind but sharp. Behind him stood a well-dressed younger man holding an umbrella. "Are you Amara Johnson?" the older man asked gently. She froze. "Yes, sir." "I am," he smiled faintly. "I thought so." He took a slow step forward. "You're the one who saved me." For a moment, Amara couldn't move. She stared, realizing who he was. The man from the crash, the one from the news. She set down the cloth in her hand and took a small step toward him. "You're Mr. Langston," he nodded. "Yes, though lately I've just been hearing the old man who almost burned up." His tone was light, but his eyes were full of emotion. "You have no idea how grateful I am." Amara shook her head quickly. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone would have done." He smiled again, that gentle kind of smile that made her feel at ease. "That's where you're wrong, my dear. Not everyone would have done what you did. Most people would have called for help and stayed away. But you didn't. I couldn't," she said softly. "I saw you in there. I just couldn't walk away." He took a seat at one of the tables, breathing slowly. The younger man, his driver, quietly stood back. "Please sit with me," Richard said. Amara hesitated, then sat down across from him. They talked for a long while. He asked about her life, her studies, her job. She told him about working at the diner, about her dream to become a nurse, about growing up in foster care. He listened quietly, never interrupting. When she spoke, his expression softened, as if her words touched something deep in him. "You've had a hard life," he said finally, "but you speak as if you're grateful for it." She smiled faintly. "I guess I am. It made me stronger, and it taught me that no matter how bad things get, there's always someone worse off who still needs help." He looked down for a moment, his hands folded over his cane. "That's a beautiful way to live." The diner was quiet now, the city outside calm. The neon sign flickered faintly in the window. Amara still couldn't believe the man sitting across from her was a billionaire, the kind of person whose name appeared in magazines and on buildings downtown. Yet here he was, talking to her like they were equals. Before leaving, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small card. "This has my number on it," he said. "If you ever need anything at all, I want you to call me." Amara looked at the card but didn't take it right away. "I don't want anything, sir." "I know," he said kindly. "That's exactly why I'm offering." She finally took it, slipping it into her apron pocket. "Thank you." When he stood to leave, he paused and looked back at her. "You gave me a second chance at life, Amara. I hope someday I can return that favor." After they left, Amara sat alone in the empty diner, staring at the small card in her hand. She still couldn't believe what had happened. The world felt different somehow, bigger, brighter. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time, she felt it might actually hold something good. That night she lay in bed thinking about everything, about kindness, about fate, about how two lives that were never supposed to meet somehow crossed paths in the rain. She smiled softly to herself. Maybe Mrs. Johnson had been right all along. Maybe something good was finally coming her way. And miles away in a large house on the hill, Richard Langston sat by his fireplace, the glow of the flames reflecting in his eyes. On the table beside him lay a photo of Amara, taken from the diner's security camera, a keepsake of the stranger who had changed his life. He closed his eyes, whispering a quiet promise to himself. He would find a way to change hers too. The next few weeks passed quietly, but something had changed in both Amara and Richard. For Amara, life went on much as before. Early mornings, long shifts, and late-night studying, but there was a new lightness in her heart. Every so often, she'd think about that evening in the diner when Richard had walked in. It still didn't seem real that a man like him had come looking for her just to say thank you. She kept the little card he'd given her tucked safely inside a book near her bed. She never planned to use it, but sometimes she'd take it out and look at it, wondering what his world was like. She imagined him surrounded by luxury, people who called him Sir, a life that was the complete opposite of hers. Still, when she thought of him, she didn't see a billionaire. She just saw the fragile old man she'd pulled from a burning car, whose hand she'd held in the rain. One afternoon at the diner, as she carried a tray of coffee cups, a black car pulled up outside. She didn't think much of it at first. Plenty of nice cars passed through, but when she saw who stepped out, her eyes widened. It was the same gray-haired man, dressed neatly, walking slowly with his cane. "Mr. Langston?" she said in surprise when he came in. He smiled. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by." "Of course not," she said quickly, setting the tray down. "Please, have a seat." This time he wasn't alone. A woman in her 40s, elegant and composed, followed behind him. "This is my assistant, Clara," he said, introducing her kindly. "She keeps me organized when I forget what day it is." Clara smiled warmly. "He's not exaggerating," she said. Amara laughed softly, a little nervous but happy to see him again. "Can I get you something to eat?" "I'd love one of those pies you served last time," Richard said, sitting down at his favorite table by the window. "And maybe some tea." Amara nodded and hurried off. As she moved around the diner, she could feel his eyes following her, not in a judging way, but as if he was studying her, trying to understand her life a little more. When she brought his order, he looked around the small diner and said quietly, "You work very hard, don't you?" She shrugged. "I guess so. I have to." He stirred his tea slowly. "Do you ever get tired of it?" She paused for a moment before answering. "Sometimes. But I remind myself it's temporary. One day I'll be working in a hospital. That's what keeps me going." "That's a good dream," he said softly. "Helping people." She smiled. "It's what I want most." For a while they just talked, about small things, about her college classes, her favorite subjects, the people she met at the diner. Richard listened with genuine interest. Clara watched quietly, occasionally smiling at how natural their conversation seemed. Before leaving, Richard placed an envelope on the table. "What's that?" Amara asked. "Just a small thank you," he said. "Please take it," Amara frowned, shaking her head. "I can't, sir. You've already thanked me. That's enough." He smiled gently. "It's nothing extravagant, I promise. Just consider it. Lunch for the next few weeks." She hesitated, then finally opened it. Inside was a grocery store gift card. She laughed softly, partly in relief and partly from gratitude. "You really didn't have to." "I know," he said. "That's why I wanted to." When he left, Amara stood by the door watching the car disappear down the road. She didn't realize it then, but that small act would be the start of something bigger. Over the next few weeks, Richard began visiting more often. Sometimes he'd come for tea, sometimes for pie, and sometimes just to talk. The other workers at the diner would whisper and smile whenever he came in, teasing Amara lightly. "Your friend's back again," Lisa would say with a grin. "He's not my friend," Amara would reply, blushing. "He's just someone I helped." But deep down, she was glad every time he showed up. She enjoyed his company. He had stories, funny, sad, surprising stories from a life full of experiences. He talked about his travels, about how he built his business from scratch, and about how lonely success could be. One afternoon when the diner was quiet, he told her something that stayed with her. "I used to think money could fill any emptiness," he said softly. "But when I woke up in that hospital bed, all I could think about was how close I came to dying without ever doing something that truly mattered." You changed that for me, Amara. You reminded me what kindness looks like when it has no price. She didn't know what to say. All she could manage was a quiet, "You would have done the same for me." He smiled faintly. "I hope so." It became routine. His visits, their conversations, the laughter that filled those quiet corners of the diner. Slowly, Amara began to see him not as a billionaire or a stranger she'd saved, but as someone who truly cared about her well-being. One day he asked her, "Would you ever consider coming to my office? I'd love for you to see where I work." She hesitated. "I wouldn't fit in there." "Nonsense," he said. "It's just a building. You'd fit anywhere you belong." She thought about it for a few days before finally agreeing. When she arrived, she was nervous. The tall glass building looked intimidating with people in suits walking briskly through the lobby, but when she stepped out of the elevator and into Richard's office, she felt at ease again. He greeted her with that same warm smile. "Welcome," he said. "Come, I want to show you something." He led her to the large window that overlooked the city. The view stretched for miles, the skyline glowing in the afternoon sun. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," he agreed. "But it means nothing without someone to share it with." He looked at her, his tone soft but serious. "I've built companies, bought buildings, invested in hundreds of things, but lately I've realized the most important investment is people, especially those who remind me why life matters." She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she could tell it came from his heart. Before she left, he handed her a small notebook. "This was mine," he said. "I used it when I first started my business. I wrote every idea, every lesson, every mistake. I want you to use it for your dreams." She looked down at the worn leather cover. "I don't know what to say." "Just promise me you'll fill it," he said with a smile. And she did. Every night after her shifts, she began writing. Not just about her goals, but about her feelings, her fears, her hopes for the future. She didn't realize it then, but the notebook became a symbol of something much deeper, faith in herself. Meanwhile, Richard found himself thinking about her more and more. He hadn't expected this connection. In a world full of people chasing wealth and recognition, Amara was different. She wanted nothing, yet she gave everything. She reminded him of the daughter he never had, and of the person he used to be before money complicated his life. One afternoon, he called his lawyer. "I want to set up something," he said. "A scholarship program for young people like Amara, those who've had a rough start but haven't lost their kindness." The lawyer nodded. "What would you like to call it?" He thought for a moment, smiling. "The Hope Grant." He didn't tell Amara about it yet. He wanted it to be a surprise, but as the days went on, she began to notice small things. Once, when she mentioned struggling to pay for her next semester, an anonymous scholarship suddenly covered her tuition. Another time, when her landlord raised the rent, she got a call saying a donor had helped with her balance. She had her suspicions, of course. Only one person could have done it. But when she asked Richard about it, he'd just smile and change the subject. "Some good things don't need names attached," he'd say. As time passed, their friendship deepened into something like family. Amara started visiting his home on weekends, sometimes helping him cook or listening to music from his old record player. He'd tell her stories from his youth, and she'd laugh at how mischievous he used to be. One evening, while they were having dinner, he said quietly, "You know, I was alone for a long time before that crash. I thought my life was winding down. But then you showed up, and suddenly I wanted to keep living again." Amara's eyes softened. "You've done more for me than you know," she said. "You made me believe that good people still exist." They smiled at each other in silence, both feeling something words couldn't fully explain. Gratitude, affection, a sense of belonging neither had felt in years. That night, when Amara walked home under the streetlights, she felt different, lighter. She realized that sometimes life connects people for reasons they can't see yet. What began as a moment of tragedy on a rainy road had turned into something beautiful, a friendship built not on wealth or status but on humanity itself. And in the distance, as Richard watched her leave through the window of his study, he whispered to himself, "She doesn't even know it yet, but her life's about to change forever. The following months moved gently, like slow waves passing through quiet water. Amara's life began to change in ways she hadn't expected. She was still the same girl who worked long hours at the diner and studied late into the night. But now there was something more. There was hope. Richard had become a steady part of her world. Every week he stopped by the diner, and sometimes they met outside, at the park, at the library, or at a small cafe where he said the tea tasted almost as good as the one at his mansion. Their conversations had grown deeper, more personal. They talked about everything: dreams, fears, life lessons, and the things they both regretted. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench near the river, Richard looked out at the water and said quietly, "You know, when I was young, I thought success meant having control over everything. But you can't control life. You can only choose what kind of person you'll be when it changes on you." Amara smiled softly. "I think that's what I've been trying to figure out. How to stay kind when life isn't." He looked at her and nodded slowly. "You already are. You just don't see it yet." There was a peaceful silence between them, broken only by the sound of birds nearby. Richard had begun walking slower lately, and sometimes he'd pause to catch his breath, but he never complained. Amara noticed the way his hands trembled slightly when he lifted his tea, or how his steps grew smaller each week. Still, he was always cheerful around her. One morning, Amara was cleaning tables at the diner when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Clara, Richard's assistant. It read, "Mr. Langston isn't feeling well today. He asked if you could come by the house later if you have time." Amara's heart skipped. She finished her shift early and took the bus to his neighborhood, a place that always felt like another world. The streets were wide, lined with trees, and the houses looked like they belonged in magazines. But the moment she walked through the gates to his home, all she saw was him, an old man she cared about, sitting in his garden with a blanket over his lap. "Hey there," she said softly, approaching him. He smiled weakly. "You came." "I knew you would." "Of course I did. Clara said you weren't feeling well." He chuckled. "I've just been tired lately. Doctors say I need to slow down." She sat beside him. "You've been working too much again, haven't you?" "Maybe," he admitted. "But work keeps me busy. And being busy makes me feel alive." She reached over and touched his hand lightly. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. You've already done enough." He looked at her, his eyes gentle. "I used to think that too. But now I think there's still something left to do, something that matters." She frowned a little. "What do you mean?" He just smiled. "You'll see." They spent the afternoon talking quietly. The garden was full of sunlight and the smell of roses. Amara helped him walk back inside, and before she left, he said, "You remind me of my wife." That made her pause. He rarely spoke of his past. She was kind, he continued. Not the kind that comes and goes, but the kind that stays steady even when life gets hard. "You have that too." Amara didn't know what to say. She only smiled, touched by his words. As the weeks went by, she noticed more changes. Sometimes Richard missed their meetings because of doctor visits. Other times he called just to hear her voice. Amara didn't like to think about it, but deep down she knew time was catching up with him. One evening she arrived at the diner to find Clara waiting for her outside. "Clara, is everything okay?" Amara asked, worry filling her voice. Clara smiled faintly. "He's fine, but he's stubborn as always. He won't rest unless he knows you're doing well." Amara blinked. "Me?" "Yes," Clara said softly. "He talks about you all the time. You've brought him more joy in the last few months than most people have in years." That night, after her shift, Amara called him. His voice was weak but cheerful. "You're working too hard again, aren't you?" He teased. "I could say the same to you," she replied with a laugh. He chuckled. "Touché." Then, after a pause, he said quietly, "Promise me something, Amara. Promise me you won't stop believing in yourself when I'm gone." She went silent for a moment, her throat tightening. "Don't talk like that," she said softly. "You're not going anywhere." He sighed gently. "I'm old, my dear. We both know that. But what comforts me is knowing that there are people like you in the world. People who still care." Tears filled her eyes. "You've done more for me than I ever imagined, Mr. Langston. I wouldn't even be in school right now if it weren't for you." He smiled faintly. "Let's just say the world gave back to you what you've already given to it." They talked a little longer that night, about simple things, music, food, the weather. but Amara could hear something in his voice. A softness, like he was saying goodbye without saying the words. The next few days were quiet. She didn't hear from him, and when she called, Clara said he was resting. Amara worried, but she also trusted that he was being cared for. She focused on her exams and shifts, though her heart felt heavy. Then, one afternoon as she walked home from class, she heard someone calling her name. It was Clara again, standing by a car. "Amara," she said gently, "he's asking for you." Amara's stomach dropped. Without hesitation, she climbed into the car. They drove in silence, and when they arrived, the house felt different, quieter, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Richard was lying in his bed, pale but peaceful. When he saw her, a faint smile appeared. "You came." "Of course," she said softly, moving closer. "I'm here." He reached out and took her hand. "Do you remember the night we met?" She nodded. "I'll never forget. You saved my life," he whispered. "But you did more than that. You reminded me what life was for." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "You've done the same for me." He looked at her with eyes full of warmth. "Promise me you'll keep going. Help others. Never lose your kindness." "I promise," she said, her voice breaking. He smiled one last time. "Good. That's all I needed to hear." For a moment, they just sat there holding hands in silence. He closed his eyes, his breathing slow and calm. She stayed beside him until he drifted into sleep. When Clara walked in quietly a few minutes later, Amara already knew. She cried softly, but it wasn't just sadness, it was love, gratitude, and the ache of losing someone who had become family. The following week was filled with tributes and news stories. Everyone wanted to talk about Richard Langston, the successful businessman, the philanthropist, the man who built half the city. But Amara remembered him differently. She remembered the man who came to her diner for pie, who told stories that made her laugh, who cared about her dreams when no one else did. She didn't go to the big public memorial. Instead, she visited his garden, the one where they used to sit and talk. The roses were still blooming. She sat on the same bench holding the small notebook he had given her. On the first page she had written, "Kindness can change everything." She whispered into the quiet air, "Thank you for believing in me." A few days later, Clara called. "There's something Mr. Langston wanted you to have," she said gently. Amara went to the lawyer's office, unsure what to expect. She didn't care about money or things, she only wanted to honor him. But when she sat down, the lawyer handed her an envelope.
Inside was a letter written in Richard's handwriting. "My dear Amara, if you are reading this, then I am finally at peace.
I told you once that you gave me a second chance at life. You did, and now it's my turn to give you one. I have left something in your name, a foundation to help young people like you who've known hardship but still choose kindness. It's called the Amara Hope Fund. May it carry forward the light you brought into my life. With love and gratitude, Richard." Tears fell freely as she read it. The lawyer explained that the foundation was real, fully funded, already established. It would help hundreds of students who, like her, had grown up without families or money but still dared to dream. Amara sat in silence for a long time, holding the letter close to her chest. She realized that even though he was gone, he hadn't really left. He'd simply left his kindness behind for others to find. When she left the office, the sun was shining brightly, and a soft breeze moved through the trees. She walked slowly down the street, feeling both sadness and peace. She knew her life had changed forever. Later that night, she returned to the diner. She sat by the window where he used to sit, ordered his favorite tea, and opened her notebook. She wrote one sentence across the page. "Sometimes the people we save end up saving us too." And she smiled, knowing that was exactly what had happened. Months passed, but the memory of Richard never faded from Amara's heart. Every morning when she woke up, she still half expected to see his name appear on her phone, asking how her studies were going or what new recipe she had tried at the diner. His absence was quiet, but it stayed with her like a soft echo, reminding her how deeply one person's kindness could change another's life. The Amara Hope Fund had already begun its work. It started small, just a few scholarships for local students who had faced tough beginnings much like her own. The first time she saw her name printed on a flyer for the foundation, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She hadn't earned it through fame or fortune. She'd earned it through compassion and chance, through one act of bravery on a dark, rainy night. At first, she felt nervous about being involved. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. But Clara encouraged her to take part, saying, "You're the heart of this, Amara. He built it because of you, so she did." She visited schools, spoke to students, and shared her story, not in a dramatic or proud way, but with honesty. She told them about growing up without parents, about working late shifts, and about how one small moment of courage could change everything. The first time she stood on a stage to talk, her hands trembled. She looked out at the crowd of young faces staring back at her, some curious, some shy, some holding the same kind of quiet hope she once carried, and her voice softened. "I used to think my life didn't matter," she said, "but one night I helped someone who needed me. I didn't know who he was, and I didn't expect anything in return. That moment taught me something. Your kindness might not change the whole world, but it can change someone's world. And sometimes that's enough." The room was silent for a moment, then filled with applause. Amara felt something rise in her chest, a mix of relief, pride, and love. She wasn't speaking for attention. She was speaking for the girl she once was, the one who needed to hear those words. Outside the hall, a young boy approached her. He couldn't have been more than 12, his backpack almost bigger than him. He looked nervous as he said, "Miss Amara, do you think someone like me could ever go to college?" She knelt down to his level and smiled. "You can do anything if you keep trying. Just don't stop believing in yourself. Promise me that." He nodded quickly, eyes wide with excitement. As he ran off to join his friends, Amara stood there, realizing how much Richard's legacy had already grown. In her own life, things were changing too. She had finished her nursing degree and was now working at a local hospital. The long shifts were hard, but she loved the work. Each day she cared for people, some scared, some sick, some lonely, and she treated every one of them with the same patience and warmth she had once shown to a stranger in a crashed car. Sometimes she caught herself telling patients, "You're going to be okay. Just breathe." It was the same thing she had said to Richard that night, kneeling beside him in the rain. She often visited his grave on quiet Sundays. The headstone was simple, just like he would have wanted. She always brought white roses from his garden, the ones he used to say were the most honest flowers. She'd sit on the grass, talking softly about her week, about the foundation, about the lives being changed because of him. One day, while she sat there, Clara joined her. She placed her own bouquet beside Amara's and said, "He'd be proud of you, you know." Amara smiled faintly. "I hope so. Sometimes I still wish I could tell him about everything that's happening." Clara nodded. "He already knows. You're doing exactly what he wanted, to keep giving." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the wind rustle through the trees. That summer, the foundation hosted its first big event, a dinner to celebrate the new group of scholarship students. Amara helped plan it, though she insisted on keeping things simple. "He never liked fancy things," she told the team. "Let's make it about the people, not the money." The evening was filled with laughter and stories. Students shared their dreams, teachers, engineers, artists, doctors. One girl stood up and said, "I grew up in a shelter and I never thought anyone would believe in me, but this foundation did. Now I'm going to college next year." The room erupted in applause. Amara sat quietly for a moment, her heart swelling with emotion. She imagined Richard sitting beside her, that familiar, gentle smile on his face. Later that night, after the event ended, she walked outside into the cool air. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and for a second everything felt perfectly still. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "We did it, Mr. Langston, we really did it." As years passed, the Amara Hope Fund grew larger. More donors joined, more students received scholarships, and more lives were transformed. Amara became not just a nurse, but a mentor to many young people. She never sought fame or recognition. Her joy came from seeing others rise. Her story began appearing in newspapers and online. Journalists loved to write about the young woman who saved a stranger and changed the future. But she always corrected them when she could. "I didn't change the future," she'd say with a smile. "I just did what I could in the moment." Sometimes she'd visit the road where everything began. The crash site had long since been cleared, and grass had grown over the spot, but standing there always brought her peace. She'd close her eyes, hearing the rain again, remembering the smell of smoke, the sound of his faint voice. She realized that night had been the beginning of everything. There were moments when she still struggled, Loneliness didn't disappear overnight, but she carried Richard's voice with her. "Keep going," he had told her, and she did. On the 10th anniversary of the foundation, a large ceremony was held at the community center. Hundreds of students and families attended. Photos lined the walls, graduates, smiling faces, stories of success. The room was full of laughter and gratitude. Amara stood on the stage holding a microphone. She took a deep breath before speaking. 10 years ago, I didn't think I would ever stand here. I was just a girl trying to survive, trying to find meaning. But life surprised me. It gave me a chance to help, and that moment led me here. To all of you, what I've learned is this: kindness never dies. It grows, it spreads, and sometimes it comes back to you when you least expect it. The audience clapped and cheered, and as she stepped down, several students hugged her. One of them said, "You're the reason I believe people can still be good." Amara smiled, holding back tears. "No," she said gently. "You're the reason." That night, when the hall was empty and the lights were dimmed, she stayed behind for a while. She looked up at a photo of Richard that hung on the wall. Him standing in his garden, wearing his favorite hat, smiling in that quiet, knowing way. She whispered, "Thank you for finding me that night." Her voice trembled with emotion. "I thought I was the one who saved you, but really you saved me." As she walked out into the warm evening air, she felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, and she imagined one of them belonged to him. Life continued on. Amara grew older, wiser, and more at ease with herself. The foundation became her life's work, but it never took away her humanity. She still worked part-time as a nurse, still stopped to talk to strangers, still carried a small notebook where she wrote thoughts and quotes that inspired her. One evening, she opened that old notebook and found the first page she ever wrote. "Kindness can change everything." She smiled and added one more line underneath, "And love makes it last forever." She closed the notebook, placed it on her bedside table, and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the man who had believed in her, for the people who kept her strong, and for the life she had built out of hope. Her story had started with loss, but it had ended with purpose. And as long as the foundation continued to help others, Richard's spirit and the lesson he left behind would never fade. Because somewhere in every act of kindness, in every life touched by compassion, their story lived on.